Hi Hillcrest. We've made it to the week before Thanksgiving and now I have a story to share with you. So this story is really fantastic and it's called Thank You Omu. And right before we go to Thanksgiving break, it's a good time to look at stories that help us remember to be thankful for the people in our life. Now, I want you to look at this word. Omu is how you say this. And if you lived in the country of Nigeria on the continent of Africa, you would speak Igbo. And if you were speaking Igbo, you would say Amu as a word for a woman that you knew, sometimes and often your grandma or an older woman that was awesome, because the word means queen. So Amu is a queen. And you would call that to a woman that you respect, like a queen. And it says here, Thank You Omu by Olga Mora. On the corner of First and Long Street, on the very top floor, Amu was cooking a thick red stew in a big fat pot for a nice evening meal. She seasoned and stirred it and took a small taste. What a delicious stew, Amu said. Tonight's dinner will surely be the best I've ever had. With that, Amu put down her spoon and went to read a book before supper. As the thick red stew simmered on the stove, its scrumptious scent wafted out the window and out the door and down the hall and toward the street and around the block until someone was at the door. When Amu opened it, she saw a little boy. Little boy, Amu exclaimed, what brings you to my home? Well, I was playing with my race car down the hall when I smelled the most delicious smell, the little boy replied. What is it? Thick red stew, said Amu. Rubbing her belly's stew, he sighed. That sounds yummy. Amu thought for a moment. She was saving her stew for dinner, but she had made quite a bit. It would not hurt to share. Would you like some? She asked. The little boy nodded, and Amu spooned out some of the thick red stew from the big fat pot for her nice evening meal. Thank you, Amu, the little boy said, and he went on his way. With that, Amu closed the door and went back to her book. As she read, her thick red stew's scrumptious scent wafted out the window and out the door and down the hall and toward the street and around the block until someone was at the door. When Amu opened the door, this time she saw a police officer. Miss Police Officer, said Amu, what brings you to my home? Well, I was on duty down the street when I smelled the most delicious smell, Miss Police Officer replied. What is it? It's thick red stew, said Amu. Stew, she said, and her mouth watered. That sounds mighty tasty. Amu thought for a moment. There was still enough to share. Would you like some? The police officer nodded, and once again Amu spooned out some thick red stew from the big fat pot for her nice evening meal. Thank you, Amu, the police officer said, and she went on her way. And so, for the second time, Amu closed the door and went back to her book. Sure enough, as she read, the thick red stew's scent wafted out the window and out the door and down the hall and toward the street and around the block until again, someone was at Amu's door, and this time when she opened it, she saw a hot dog vendor. A vendor is a fancy word for seller. He sells hot dogs down the street. Mr. Hot Dog Vendor, Amu exclaimed, what brings you to my home? Well, I was selling hot dogs down the block when I smelled the most delicious smell. The hot dog vendor replied, what is it? It's thick red stew. Stew. The hot dog vendor licked his lips. That sounds quite delectable. So Amu spooned out some thick red stew from her big fat pot for her nice evening meal. Thank you, Amu, the hot dog vendor said, and he went on his way. Now, throughout the day, people from all across the neighborhood knocked on Amu's door. She fed a shop owner and a cab driver and a doctor, an actor, a lawyer, a dancer, a baker, an artist, a singer, an athlete, a bus driver. a construction worker, even the mayor stopped by. And each time they knocked, Omu shared. And soon the sky darkened and the street lights brightened, and it was finally time for dinner. But when Omu opened her big fat pot of thick red stew for her nice evening meal, it was empty. Oh no. Omu sniffled. There goes the best dinner I ever had. Sorry and blue, she sat at the table with her empty pot until... Who could that be? When she opened her door, she saw the little boy, the police officer, the hot dog vendor, the shop owner, the cab driver, the doctor, the actor, the lawyer, the dancer, the baker. Why, everyone she fed today was at her door. I'm sorry, everyone, Omu sighed. My thick red stew is all gone. I have nothing left to share. The little boy tugged on Amu's sleeve and said, Don't worry, Omu. We are not here to ask. We are here to give. The police officer carried in a fresh salad. The mayor entered with a roast chicken. The baker brought a collection of sweet goodies. Even the little boy presented Omu with something in a shiny red envelope. Everyone who had knocked on Amu's door that day squeezed inside her tiny apartment, and together they ate and danced and celebrated. And while Amu's big fat pot of thick red stew was empty, her heart was full of happiness and love, and so was her house. And that dinner was the best she ever saw, or she ever had. Now, this year, we may not be able to squeeze into tiny apartments with everyone that we love, but we can still be grateful for the times that we had, and we can come to appreciate them more. I hope that you guys have someone in your life like an Omu who is generous and shares from her kitchen and her heart and her life. And the author here has a note for us, and she says, in Igbo, the Nigerian language of my parents, Omu means queen. Yet for me, growing up, it meant grandma. When my grandmother cooked, she danced and swayed her hips to the radio as she stirred what was often a large pot of stew. And in the evenings, my family would come together at the dinner table for a meal. If a neighbor was visiting, they were invited. If a friend stopped by, they were invited. Everyone in the community had a seat at my grandmother's table. While my grandmother has since passed away, her giving heart has stayed with me. I see it in my mother, my godmother, my teachers, my mentors, and countless powerful women who have shaped my life. This book is a celebration of their loving and giving spirit. Thank you. And I think that she's captured that loving and giving spirit very beautifully. Thank you for reading the story with me. I hope that you have a safe and wonderful Thanksgiving, even though it may look different. I'll see you after Thanksgiving, and we'll start to read our Christmas stories. Goodbye, friends. Happy Thanksgiving.